All right, welcome back to the Tul World podcast. I'm your host, David Jew, and I'm here with Master Jew.
How's it going there, Mr. Jew?
It's going pretty good.
A little smoky outside?
Yeah, a little bit. Fire nearby.
Summertime?
Yeah.
No water? That's okay.
That's okay.
Okay.
In other news, we're looking at the some ITF pages, and somebody had a question about in Dongun, the strike, they call it an outward knife hand strike, or outward strike with the knife hand in an L stance. And then in Dosan, the same one, they call it a side strike in a sitting stance.
Right.
Right, so
Right.
let's go through that again. You got Dongun, that's the outward strike. Dosan.
With the knife hand.
Right, with the knife hand. And Dosan is side strike with the knife hand.
Are they the same or different?
Well, that's the real question. Are they the same, different? Why the difference in the name?
And what makes a
Right.
difference?
And so what are your thoughts on that?
That is a very interesting question because they both are performed outward. Outward meaning that it goes from the solar plex line outward, right? So in Dangun, it's an outward strike. Dao-san is an outward strike. However, the difference between the two is one is in an L stance and one is in a sitting stance. So that also makes you kind of think a little bit about what is the difference between side strike and outward or inward strike. Because if you look at inward knife hand strike, such as in Wan Yo, that's in an L stance. And that makes sense. It's a technique that comes from the outside in. Inward strike is also done in an L stance. Side strikes, well, that's also similar to like a side piercing kick. It's to my side, and generally it's, so when we look at our body position, any technique that goes to the front is a front technique. Anything that goes to the side is a side technique. Anything that goes behind us is a back technique, right?
Right.
Front snap kicks to front, side piercing kick, side thrusting kicks to my side, and anything behind me is back, right? So, but in these L stances, even though it's going outward, is it to my side? Yes, and yes it is, and yes it's not. It's because it's kind of in the L stance position, you're half facing.
Right, but I think the side strikes can also be done in the half facing position too.
Right.
And the side facing position.
Well, I definitely would agree that on the sitting stance, a side strike with a knife hand, you wouldn't have a side strike with the reverse knife hand in the sitting stance. I guess you could do it, but it doesn't make a lot of sense because it's your body is exposed a little bit too much. And even when you look at some of these techniques, I think General Che kind of talks a little bit about how much your body's supposed to be exposed, right? The more exposed, that's incorrect. You want to try to cover up as much as possible or reduce the target area.
Yeah.
So doing a side strike with the reverse knife hand doesn't make a lot of sense in a sitting stance because you're too exposed, right? It seems okay when you do a outward because your body's crossed. Your hands are crossing the body. So is it incorrect to say an outward knife hand strike in a sitting stance? I don't think that's incorrect.
Right.
Although that's not what it says, right?
Yeah.
It says a side strike with a knife hand in the sitting stance. Is it incorrect to say it's an outward strike with a knife hand in the sitting stance? That description describes the technique. I don't know if outward strike in an L stance, that is an outward strike in an L stance. But is it to the side? I think that's the answer to that.
Well, I think if you look at Dongun, so you have the outward knife hand strike. And to me, it seems like when he uses the word outward, that defines the technique better than whether he called it a side strike.
Right.
Because you can have, in the L stance, an outward knife hand strike and an inward knife hand strike.
Correct.
And they could both actually be going in the same direction too. So if I'm saying towards B, you could have both of those strikes going the same way. And so I think that by using the word outward versus inward, that outward versus inward said it defines it a little bit more.
I don't think it's incorrect, the terminologies. It describes both.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, obviously, you can't have long names.
No.
You could define things by a lot. You could be like, oh, in a right L stance, you're going to execute a right four-fist reverse punch, toward... I mean, you could definitely go on long lists about that.
We get a lot of that as well. It's like, why don't you just call it a front kick? Why do you have to call it a side front snap kick? Why do you have to? But it's more detailed. It says a little bit more about the technique.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that that's a good question. Right or wrong? I think they both describe. When you describe what the technique is, sitting stance, whether you say it's an outward strike with a knife hand in the sitting stance, well, that pretty much explains what that is. Or if it's called a side strike with a knife hand in a sitting stance. Although I guess you could say that if you were in a sitting stance and you did an outward strike with a knife hand, could it finish in front and off to the side? I do think that when you say side, it means to the side, and it describes that more. Mm-hmm. Just like you have reverse knife hand strike, front reverse knife hand strike is to the front, and you don't do a side strike with a reverse knife hand strike in an sitting stance. That's kind of coming from outside in towards the side, to your side. That doesn't make sense a lot.
Right.
But I think that's probably one of the key factors. Side knife hand strike, meaning it's to the side. But what kind of throws me off is your terminology. You can do it in a L stance as well, or half facing, I should say, half facing, or side facing.
Well, that would be also to like the side front, no?
Side front. Well, it's like side blocks. Low side block, high side block. That's to my side, but it's not to the front. But it is to the side.
Right.
Yeah. Well, what do you think?
Well,
Send us a note.
Anyways, don't forget to leave a comment, your thoughts on side, outward. And don't forget to share this podcast. Don't forget to be safe.
Keep training.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Taekwondo.